The one thing that I really hate about the hobby that I see all the time is people promote it as an inexpensive hobby. They're like, it's very cheap, you can do this. And I really don't like that message, because it isn't an inexpensive hobby. Yes, you can buy a corn snake for $30, but to actually set it up properly with proper lighting and heating and everything else, not saying you need to go plant it and everything, but even just the lighting, it is expensive. And I don't like us trying to promote that it's an inexpensive hobby, because I think it sets new keepers up in the wrong mindset.
Yes, it may be less expensive than something like an equestrian hobby or keeping a horse, but it still does have a price tag. Just because the animal is fairly cheap doesn't mean that its care is going to be cheap. So you shouldn't determine the care of the animal by the value of it. So if you have a $10 corn snake or whatever, I think we've had some corn snakes here for crazy amounts, like $8 each. You shouldn't spend even $20 on an enclosure, which is double. You should spend quite a bit more on the enclosure to set it up for that animal and for its well-being.
Yes, exactly. And it is funny how, and that's one of the things that the breeders always say, right? They're like, well, we have to have these massive breeding industrialized setups so we can keep the prices of the animals low. And I always think, what evidence is there to suggest that the animals should be priced that low? Should a ball python be $30, or should it be $150? So people really have to invest their time to get the animal. Now they might say, well, then they're going to spend all their money on the animal and not have enough left for the enclosure. I don't know. I think if you're forcing someone to pay a little more, they're going to have more respect for what they're buying.
I think that is so true, because generally you see the people who spend more on the rarer animals, they take the time and do the research, in fact, before they get the animal, set up their enclosure to full spec before the animal actually arrives, then quarantine it properly and put the animal in its enclosure, not buy the animal and like, now what? I got to kind of figure out what I have to do setup wise. That's why you got to make sure you have everything intact before you like go out and get the animal. That's why I think I agree with you. Setting the prices up for animals might not be a bad thing. I mean, in South Africa, we have some ridiculously cheap prices for some incredibly venomous snakes, and those will then go to kids, because oftentimes I've sold snakes at an expo, and it's the 14-year-old kids that have the money to buy a gaboon viper or a white-lipped tree viper, and they won't be, yes, they might even set it up properly, but if you set that animal's price higher, that will be a better thing. Obviously, sell to your friends at what you feel comfortable with, or just, I think prices are a strange thing.
Yes, it is, because the price has not much to do with the value of the animal, because if I buy a crested gecko for $10, I'm still going to value it for a lot more than $10, but this is really just a barrier to entry, talking about people coming into the hobby and giving them a different mindset, so making them maybe pay a little more wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But as far as venomous prices, like I've heard you say on your podcast, some ridiculously cheap prices for some deadly snakes, so maybe you could run through a short list.
Yeah, so I've personally seen Western diamondback rattlesnakes, which can put you in the ground for like 250 Rand, which is approximately $18, not even $18, maybe, no, like $15 for a venomous snake that will probably cost you over $100,000 in medical bills if it's a serious bite. And then white-lipped tree vipers, same story with them. It's quite scary, in fact.
Yeah, that is, it's just amazing to think that you could buy a snake like that for $20. Like, you can barely go to Starbucks for $20, and you can come home with a diamondback. That is just, it's so wrong.
You can't even get a ball python, a normal ball python, for that price here, but you can get one of, the scariest venomous snakes for that type of price. Even 100 paces or Chinese sharp-nosed vipers, I think their other name is 100 pacer, because literally the myth goes, if you get bitten, you've got 100 paces before you die. It pretty much explains how toxic they are and how nasty their venom can be. Those things, sold next to nothing. And the scary thing about that is they generally, as babies, are really difficult feeders. Dinocestrodon acutus is their scientific name. They are really picky, which means you'll need to force or assist feed them, and that means fingers near the bitey end. And if it's sold to a kid, somebody's going to mess up, and that can be your life you're playing with.
So as far as, I guess, it's probably a mix of both wild caught and captive bred. I imagine the Western Diamondbacks are probably captive bred, or is it mostly wild caught animals coming in on shipments?
In South Africa, most of our stuff is captive bred, whether that be from Europe or inside of the country. Mostly everything is captive bred. Every now and then you get some shipments of like wild caught gaboons, rhino vipers, because a lot of the things that tend to die off or people don't care for them properly, those die off and then people get them shipped in again. But that's starting to change now, I think, with the laws. Most countries aren't wanting to send out wild-caught animals, which is a good thing because I think people then will start to realize and take care of their animals in a different level so they can actually reproduce them, because if not, these animals will no longer exist in captivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is a positive side of it. But why would people who are captively breeding those animals sell them for so cheap? Like, why is it? Because they're just trying to make cheap money, or easy money or whatnot? Because I feel like the implications of selling a venomous snake to a 14-year-old would really weigh on you.
Yeah, I honestly don't. I don't know. Maybe it's an accidental thing of keeping two Western Diamondbacks together, and they had babies, and at a time like that they can have 50 offspring, and that's a large number, and if you don't want to keep feeding 50 snakes once a week, that'll cost you quite a bit, and so it's probably just trying to get rid of the animal for as cheap as possible.
Yeah, so price them low so they just fly off the shelf.
Exactly.
It is crazy, yeah. So anyway, I think that's an interesting point. Maybe the listeners will have a different view on that if they are a breeder, and maybe. But if you sold animals for more expensive, you don't have to produce them at the same volume. So that's the other side to it. That's good. Like if you produce 1,000 ball pythons a year, if you triple the price, you only have to sell 300 to make the same amount of money. I don't know. This is just me. This is our snake economics speculation here.
Yeah, from guys who don't make a living breeding snakes, we say that.
Yes, so take our advice, please.
Exactly.
So the topic that we were going to jump into before I sent this down that tangent was the cobra that you were going to pick up, and you decided against. And I think this goes in well with the conversation I wanted to have with you about setting goals for yourself in the hobby. So before we go down that path, maybe you could just talk a little bit about the cobra that you had the opportunity to buy but then decided not to.
Yeah, so there's this really special cobra that I've been looking at for the past 2 years. It's a really rare cobra. It's Nargis savanula, which is one of your banded forest cobra. It's